Fledi and Oversteegen, the two sisters, 14 and 16 years old respectively, became members of the Dutch resistance by their own choice. Their mother, Tleite, had inculcated in her daughters aversion to Nazi ideology since their childhood, so the sisters sewed stuffed animals for Spanish children even during the Spanish Civil War. This is another episode from Mixed War History. Welcome to the channel. Today we will tell you about two sisters and their hunt for the Nazis. The Oversteegen house became a shelter for refugees from Germany, and when Netherlands was occupied, the sisters distributed pamphlets and leaflets against the Nazi occupation. Their friend Jeanette Johanna Hannigschaft also worked with Fledi and Trusch. It was exactly Trojan Honey, led by Tleite, who helped Jews shelter in their own home, and not only in their home. Fledi could do nothing to help since she looked like a Jewish herself. As a shock to her friends, the Nazis soon began forcibly removing and deporting Jews to concentration camps. So it is not surprising that the three girls soon drew the attention of the leader of the local resistance group, which at the time consisted of 7 men. After acquiring consent from the sisters' mother and Honey's mother, the group leader began training the girls to carry out sabotage operations. They learned how to shoot, mine and blow up railroad tracks, sneakily distribute leaflets, and so on. And even after the war, the author of the book Seducing and Killing Nazis, Honey, Trusch and Fledi, Dutch resistance heroes of World War II, a friend of the sisters, Sophie Poldermansch, wrote this: "They were truly brave women. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. They came into the resistance and first delivered illegal newspapers with news about the Nazi troops. The newspapers were delivered by girls on bicycles. They also delivered false documents for the Jews who were hiding from the Nazis." At the same time, what the sisters and Honey were doing was a closely held secret. None of their friends, relatives or acquaintances even guessed that the girls were active resistance fighters. The sisters played the psychological game proficiently. None of the Germans could even suspect that the two little girls, the sisters, looked younger than their age. Riding their bikes were actually carrying either fake documents or even weapons. Thanks to this stealth, Fledi and Trusch even managed to blow up a Nazi warehouse, remaining completely above suspicion. As time passed, however, the sisters were assigned another task: the elimination of Nazi officers as well as Dutch collaborators. Originally, luring tactics were used. The sisters and Honey would dress up, make themselves up, and then go to some bar where Nazi officers liked to spend their free time. Naturally, the young beauties couldn't help but arouse their gaze. Therefore, upon receiving an obtuse hint of prospective pleasure, almost any officer would immediately leave his fellow officers and rush off after his date. Hence, the first victim was a high-ranking SS officer whom Trusch and Honey lured to the park, where resistance fighters were awaiting him. The officer was killed and immediately buried in a prepared pit. The total number of officers killed in this way is unknown, and the sisters themselves categorically refused to talk about it even after the war. After they gained experience, Fledi and Trusch began their own liquidations. Their activities looked rather daring. For instance, the girls simply rode their bicycles, and when they met a Nazi in a deserted street, they simply shot him with a pistol. Some officers were hunted down at home and murdered in cold blood. When a reasonably dangerous rumor started to circulate in the sisters' area of operation, the team leader would immediately send the sisters and Honey to act in another area. It seems strange enough that, by and large, ordinary girls were often sent by men to perform quite serious and dangerous tasks. Reading the sisters' biographies, it is sometimes impossible to understand what the rest of the group did other than kill the officers lured into the park or the woods. The only operation in which two sisters categorically refused to take part was the kidnapping of the children of a high-ranking officer. The resistance fighters wanted to exchange them later for imprisoned resistance fighters. However, Fledi and Trusch feared that the children themselves might be harmed, so the operation was rejected. Along with Honey, the sisters made up the Inseparable Trio that comprised the most combat-ready unit of the local resistance. The only downside was that Honey had a mop of bright red hair, which ultimately ruined her. It was a very striking feature, therefore it is not surprising that in April of 1945, Honey was identified and captured. It is worth noting that Honey was apprehended just a few weeks before the release. At a checkpoint, she was identified by the officer on duty. It should be also noted that Honey was simply careless. She had not dyed her red hair roots before the mission. And in the Nazi briefing book, there was a red-haired infiltrator suspected of murdering officers. Although Honey did not give up her friends at the interrogations, the girl was shot on April 17, 1945. Almost a few days before the liberation of the Netherlands. After the death of their companion as well as a friend, the shaken sisters stopped their operations for a while, and then the long-awaited liberation came soon afterward. What they had experienced during the occupation greatly changed the sisters' future lives. Fledy still managed to establish a personal life by getting married and having children. Shortly before her death, she recalled, "Once I had to shoot them myself, and I saw them falling. And what is there to feel at a moment like that? The desire to help them get up." Because of her family, Fledy was able to cope with the trauma of the occupation, at least to some extent to try to forget her horrific experiences. The older sister, Trush, never recovered until her death. "It was very hard and tragic for us afterwards. We felt it didn't please us, and it can't satisfy a person if they are not a criminal. You lose all of it. It poisons the beauty of life." Therefore, Trush devoted her life entirely to art. Trush's major works were a variety of memorials to her friend, Honey Schaft. In 1996, Fledy and Trush created the National Honey Schaft Foundation. Trush never talked about recognition, but Fledy constantly pushed for it, believing that she and her sister were unfairly forgotten simply because their mother was a communist, and the post-war Dutch government was in fact anti-communist. It was not until 2014, almost a couple of years before the sisters' deaths, that Prime Minister Mark Rutte awarded Fledy and Trush of Oversteegen the Mobilization Military Cross. And finally, the Dutch government found the strength to recognize the sisters' service in the resistance against Nazism during the occupation. But then again, there are several questions. For example, why did the head of the resistance group, as well as the other surviving fighters, did not contribute in any way to the fact that the defeat of the sisters was recognized and properly appreciated immediately after the war? Why were the sisters essentially forgotten for the next 70 years? Is it possible that this was due to the fact that the men were ashamed? After all, if you read the sisters' interviews as well as their memories, they speak rather scantily about the leaders and the rest of the fighters. According to a friend, the previously mentioned Sophie Poldermansch, the girls may have been in conflict with the leadership of the local resistance, and the reason for the conflict was Honey's arrest. After nothing was done to save her, as already mentioned, the sisters actually refused to continue to participate in the resistance. Perhaps this is what later played a cruel trick on the recognition of Fledy and Trush's actually tremendous feat. You were watching X-War History. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like.